work here. Very tiny part-time, but more importantly, I'm part of the ed team and volunteer here many hours a week. And that's how I know, actually, I've known Tom since he started working here, way back under Carolyn Singer. So he and I worked on this. He's all the information. I just did the slides, but we worked really hard yesterday and getting it to be hopefully a good show for you tonight. So, Tom Spitalere, our expert for the evening. Yay!
Well, I don't really call it something. So welcome everybody to Revolutionary War Haverhill. And welcome to the Buttonwoods. And yes, it is 2:50, which is great. Just briefly before I get started, this, you might have heard me earlier, but I'll say it one more time. This is less than 1/3 of my bicentennial collection. So it's up here this month. There'll be a small exhibit up July in Methuen and a huge 2-room exhibit. I may not put everything up there because I just got a whole bunch of new stuff in at the Lawrence Heritage State Park on Jackson Street for the whole month of July. So that's where the exhibit's going in. You never know where it's going to end up at the end of the year because 250 goes till, well, the end of the year. There'll be a small 250 exhibit up for the Buttonwoods Festival of Trees. We'll have another stuff you might not have seen from this exhibit. I'll have it up during the Festival of Trees like we did last year to kick off the 250. So in front of me, so this is...
This is you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. So before we get into this, it's very important to know that our heroes from the Revolutionary War at the Battle of Lexington and Concord, well, we were a day late and $1 short. And the reason for the day late and $1 short was on April 16th, 1775, a fire broke out in downtown Haverhill. Now, some of you guys have seen my other talk on the Great Fire of Haverhill. That was 100 or so years later. This was a fire. And you can read the quote up there from Reverend Smith of the First Baptist Church of Haverhill, which started where? In a Duncan house with James Henry Duncan and Mr. Smith talking later on. So it was quite the, we just found that purely by accident. You're going to be shocked at some of the stuff we found purely by accident and how Haverhill was actually Haverhill Regiment, Haverhill men were actually heroes in some of these battles I'll be talking about. So briefly, on the night of April 16, 1775, the Sabbath, Reverend Smith was sitting there going over his paperwork, getting things ready, and all of a sudden he heard this fire. The barn of, oh, there he is. The barn of, where did that go to? The barn disappeared. Oh, the barn of Jonathan Webster caught on fire. And from there, the fire broke out to the west side of Main Street, pretty much from the river right up Main Street. And it spread real quickly because we had dry conditions for winter. Kind of familiar, isn't it? The fire spread quickly and engulfed Squire John White's home, his brick tavern, Dudley Ladd, his home, and a distill and house owned by James Henry Duncan, who later built the Duncan house that's on our property right now. So when it was all said and done, there was 2 hatter shops, 4 store homes, 1 shoe shop, and a tin maker, and a shop that was owned by Deacon Dodge. 17 buildings were destroyed in that one fire. But how did they put the fire out back then? Anybody want to take a guess?
Bucket Brigade.
The Bucket Brigade. So do you think that fire went out by the end of the day on April 16th? No. So that fire continued to burn. Okay? And it burned for a couple of days, and we're going to head back to that fire in a little bit, okay? But as April 16 comes along, we're starting to have some issues with the British. So we now have what's going on. We got the cause of the war that's about ready to hit us. So, the French-Indian War, which is a talk for another day, but we have to start with it. 1754 to 1763. That caught in 1756. It cost in today's standards $75 million. Then by 1763, that war cost $133 to $140 million. So the colonies in England were left, yes, the English won, they beat the French at the war, but we're left in debt. We, the colonists, only paid 1/20th of the tax that were paid by British subjects in Britain. So remember that too. Britain started to pass a series of taxes, the Sugar Act, which was for sugar, wine, coffee, and textiles. Later in 1764, the Stamp Act of 1765, which was a tax on all paper goods, including newspaper, legal documents, and of course, every colonial's favorite, playing cards. So they weren't happy. Both these acts were repealed in 1766 due to colonial pushback. From 1766 to 1788, the British added new taxes on the colonists. That upset them and led to a boycotting British goods. Then, on March 5th, 1770, as a result of a verbal confrontation between British regulars and colonists, British soldiers fired into a group of about 300 to 400 people, killing only 5. Boy, that must tell you how great the British soldiers must have learned how to shoot. I mean, they were standing in front of each other. And we all know what that's called, right, everybody? The Boston Massacre. There's a great picture of it over there, and there's one up here. So we got the massacre, we got the French-Indian War, and we got the Tea Party coming up. So, the Tea Act of 1773. The act was not to upset the colonists, but save the fluttering East India Company from going out of business. On December 16, 1773, the Sons of Liberty members, dressed like Mohawk Indians, boarded 3 ships and dumped 340 wooden chests of tea containing about 90,000 pounds of tea in Boston Harbor. That became known as the Boston Tea Party. So we have all this going on. So I know some people have tried it. So I'm going to ask real quick. I know a couple people tried the colonial tea. Did you like it?
It was fine.
Or would you like the British tea better? Okay. What would you like better, regular tea or British tea?
I mean, I didn't try the British one with it, so it's hard to tell.
British tea would just be your black tea that we have today, same tea. And the Liberty tea was the other one.
Yeah, which you two are drinking, and there's more downstairs. On June, we skipped that one. On June 28, 1774, July 28, 1774, the citizens of Haverhill voted not to import, purchase, or consume any products, including East India Company tea, until the duty imposed upon the colonists shall be taken off. Oh, and the Port of Boston reopened, because the British shut down the Port of Boston after the Tea Party in response to us throwing their tea into Boston Harbor. I think the tea's all gone by now, so that's our Boston Harbor tea. Women led the boycott by refusing to drink British tea. They made their own tea from locally grown herbs, spices, and, believe it or not, pine needles. Remember though, those things were mixed, they would be strained out. But pine needles, when you boil it, it gives off a nice little flavor. But you wouldn't eat the pine needles. These laws were passed in the colonies, were enforced by local citizens. So these boycotts were enforced by the locals. They boycott the local stores, the owners, the shops, and even tell the loyalists, because remember, there were loyalists living in this colonies, which we'll get to. We will get to that, because if we weren't just all colonists that were in favor of getting rid of Britain, there were people here in Haverhill that said, keep Britain. We love Britain. Then on September, okay, can you,
Oops, sorry.
yeah, there we go. Town meeting. So before we get to that town meeting, we had another town meeting first. On September 5th, 1774, at a town meeting, they voted on they voted to form a fourth militia. The Haverhill Artillery Company, led by Captain James Brickett. Then, in March of 1775, they voted on a company uniform, which is that blue coat you see, with yellow pine buttons cut halfway up the thigh, pockets aslope, also a buff waistcoat and breeches, white stockings with half boots and gaiters, hats to be cocked sideways, a light bright and the guns were bright, and they had steel ramrods. That was the muskets they were using. So that there would be what the colonial militia would be wearing. And then a problem happened. Anyone know what the problem might have been? Oh, and these things were these new uniforms were supposed to be ready by the first Monday in May of 1775. Uh-oh, something happened. Can anyone guess what might have happened?
Sorry, I didn't put it.
Lexington and Concord. War breaks out on April 19, 1775. British soldiers leave Boston and head to Concord to destroy military supplies at Lexington Green. And then at Lexington Green, they get slowed up. The British are met by the militia. Someone, and we don't know who, there are beliefs it came from somewhere along the tree line, but someone fired the first shot heard around the world. And we had the Battle of Lexington and Concord. They went all the way to Concord, so the alarm went out the night before the British were coming. They got ready. Now, let's talk about where Haverhill was during all this time. Remember, there was a fire brewing, right? So not everybody could go to this call because they had to put the fire out. But 3 militia groups, led by Captain James Sawyer, Captain Ebenezer Colby, Lieutenant Samuel Clemens, answered the call, along with 105 militiamen from Haverhill. They marched 30 miles over 14 hours. When they arrived, the battle was over. But don't get rid of that yet. They headed to Charlestown. So if you look at this real quick here, we're over here. They came through Andover, Tewksbury, Billerica, Bedford, Lexington, into Charlestown. Get ready for this. Imagine that walk. That's not even on a main road today. I mean, the education department did a great job putting this map together. I believe Emily and Carol both worked on this. They did a great job running this. But this is the way they would have went. All the way down to Lexington and Concord. Imagine that walk today with a musket that probably weighs close to 100 pounds. And all the other stuff you'd be carrying. Not sure about that. But, yeah. So, remember I said not everybody made it. So, with the fire still burning, some stayed behind. So, including this here, okay. The late dreadful fire in town, the great number of our peoples gone to the army, the great numbers from the other government that passed and repassed through this town. The disturbances it renders is absolutely necessary as we apprehend that we attend at home to preserve order and quiet. Therefore, sir, we hope we will excuse our non-attendance at this session. So they were asking to the government, saying, hey, sorry, we couldn't send everybody. And the most important person they didn't send, because he actually stayed behind, was Colonel James Brickett. His crew stayed behind. He did catch up to them, though. Brickett did catch up to the men in Charlestown. and they said that was fine, so that's a good thing. And what happened next? The Haverhill men joined the war. So we missed Lexington and Concord. But guess what? We didn't miss the Battle of Bunker Hill, AKA Breeds Hill. June 17, 1775. 138 Patriots were killed, and it was a British victory. That's the oversight of this. We had about 2,400 troops, and the British had about 3,000 plus. There were 2 casualties, John Eaton and Simon Pike, both from Captain Sawyer's camp, the only 2 from Haverhill that died on that day. 74 Patriots from Haverhill. 1 out of every 20 Patriots that fought at the Battle of Bunker Hill was from Haverhill's regiments. Think of that one. 1 out of every 20. And Charlestown's pretty far from here. I mean, it was 14 hours just to get to Lexington and Concord. There were probably another 2-3 hours, so 17, 18 hours to march. I mean, so 21 Haverhill soldiers lost their guns. Haverhill resident Dr. James Brickett actually became Colonel James Brickett, leader of the company from Haverhill. He was wounded. He was the first one of the early ones wounded at the Battle of Bunker Hill. Colonel Brickett was wounded in his foot, and when the cannon blast went off and destroyed the wood underneath his feet, he still had shock till the day he died. He couldn't hit, he still had pain in his foot, but he did survive, and we'll talk about him a little later on. But what Dr. Brickett did in his foot, so Colonel Sweat, S-W-E-T-T, who's actually a Dr. Sweat, I found out, thanks to Joe Bello over there. He helped me try to come up with another answer for this one, because I found this very interesting. And there's an account at the battle. So when Brickett was taken off the hill, there was not enough weaponry for every soldier. So every soldier that was injured would give up their weapons. He ended up giving his weapons and his sword and everything to this guy named General Joseph Warren. Who's heard of him? Anybody that's watched anything on the American Revolution, Dr. Warren started the Sons of Liberty. He's the one that had the spies' intel information about what was going on in Boston, and he's the one that got Hancock and Adams and all them together. He died at Bunker Hill. He didn't make it off of Bunker Hill. But fight as a volunteer, and his arms of Lieutenant Colonel James Brickett came off with the first wounded. Brickett was later promoted to Brigadier General and led an expedition to Canada, Fort Ticonderoga, and his troops during the sea battles of Lake Champlain. So this guy was all over the place. After Bourgogn's surrender at Saratoga in 1777, General Brickett was placed on escort to command 6,000 battlefield troops to Cambridge, Mass. In June of 1780, he was served on the Constitutional Convention. We have a musket in the collection, if you want to go look at it, it's in the general collection room after the talk, that actually came, we believe, according to what was researched by, he's not here today, I'm surprised, but we had a guy who was very into the American Revolution, go through all the collection, the weaponry that we do have out on display, and he found out that the musket that's at the top might have came from this surrender, the Bourgogn's surrender at Saratoga. It's actually marked. I wasn't going to bring it out because there was no safe place to keep it. It's under glass. You could actually go look at it though. One other quick thing I did want to add. There were actually some black soldiers that did fight in this war. And we did have a guy named Prince from Haverhill that went to the Battle of Bunker Hill. Now, we're not trying to cause any commotion, but there was actually a prince from Bethune that also fought at the same Battle of Bunker Hill. We're still trying to figure out if it's the same prince or we got 2 different princes. It's not easy tracking down black slave men that were fighting during the American Revolution. They're there, and supposedly our prince made it up to Dunbarton, New Hampshire. where a lot of the soldiers went. But we still haven't tracked down if we're dealing with 2 princes or 1. There's always more to go in the American Revolution, and maybe soon we'll have another talk on this. So that's, and then now we're gonna go life in the home front. Life in the home front, just so you guys know, that's the John Ward House. That's the fire going in the Ward House. We still use the Ward House today for education programs and different things. So, fact, oh yeah, okay. So war is tough with men, women, with men and children off fighting for our freedom and protection in our community from the English invaders. Women were put in charge of the households, if there was a household to be in charge of. We'll get to that in a minute. Women would run the farms, run the businesses if there were storekeepers. The men were the storekeepers, the women would take that over, take the printing over. There was great uncertainty. Now, we've all seen the movies, right? We don't always believe what we see in the movie, but if you see the movie The Patriot, you see that General Totten Baptiste actually rode into outside of Charlestown and wiped out the village and burned the house that's down. The British did do that. I've read that in other books where they've actually burned towns down. So this was common. So the women in here worried about this. Now, thank God Haverhill was far enough away that we didn't have that issue. But imagine living in that time where you don't know what's going to happen, especially coming shortly. This wasn't like too far after the French-Indian War, where Haverhill was attacked and ransacked. So people who lived through that are still wondering. So women had to pick up arms. Women were heroic during the American Revolution. There were stories of women running gunpowder to their men in forts so they could keep up the battle going. So a great uncertainty of fighting. They were worried about their burning homes, stealing of their food, the soldiers coming and wiping everything out, taking their food and their crops. So women and the children that were too young to go to war had to spread the manure, plant the crops, clean the houses, make soap, make butter churn, sheep shearing, and harvest and plant the crops, fix the fences, take care of the barns. If you had a big storm and a piece of wood blew off of it, just like your house today, you never know. So women did that. They also did something else. Those are called camp women. So when the men were getting ready, they were in camp somewhere. These women here came along because they didn't have a house to run. They were poor. They came along, or they were ardent patriots, like we're going to get the one big one at the end of this talk. And they would help take care of the men. If they got injured, clean the clothes, get the food cooked. So those were encampment women or camp women. And that was very common too. You don't read about that in the regular history books. So it's, you know, it's interesting, all these other moving parts that we don't really know about, but did happen. All right, now we're going to get to the end of the war. The Siege of Yorktown. The British surrendered on October 19th. The Treaty of Paris would end the war September 3rd, 1783, and the British troops left New York City. All right, on November 25th, 1783. But I had to find I wanted to find where Haverhill was involved in this. Right down the street is the Hazen Spiller Garrison on Groveland Street, right at the corner where the lights go up. That was Moses Hazen's house. He was promoted Brigadier General. Moses Hazen was a hero in the French-Indian War and served under Rogers Rangers, that a lot of the British troops actually did. So, and Rogers is a story for another day, but this gentleman, for what we're talking about right now, he was he was assigned command of a brigade under General Marquis de Lafayette at the Siege of Yorktown. Hazen's brigade served on the right of the line and was deeply involved in the October 14th battles. He later moved up to Canada, but That's Moses Hazen, he was from Haverhill, and, you wanna go check the Hazen Garrison house, you can just drive by and check it out. But another Haverhill guy who fought hard in the American Revolution. It's hard to believe, when I decided to do this talk, I knew there was a lot, but what we've been uncovering, I've left half of it out, because I'd be here for another 3 hours. I turned it down, did a couple other talks, but for now, for today's sake, we keep moving. Community divided. Remember I said earlier, not everybody was a happy camper. In the years leading up to the American Revolution, the estate belonged to Colonel Richard Saltonstall, which is where the Duncan House is today. That was the original house, and here's a picture of Saltonstall. There's the house that's no longer there. He served honorably in the French-Indian War and had been appointed High Sheriff of Essex County. However, he remained a loyalist, and the community largely supported the Patriot cause. He was not in agreement, however, with Parliament had gone about trying to assert their authority over the colonies. However, though, he did agree on one thing, and it got him in a lot of trouble. He agreed that the British had the right to tax us. How many people think we're happy over that one? They were not. So, while previously well-liked and respected in the community, feelings towards him had turned cold and distrustful. The story goes that the mob came to his home at Saltonstall's seat in Haverhill, where, if you recall, his family had lived for generations. Brandishing clubs and other instruments, they threatened to burn his house down with a minute. But he was quick on his feet. Guy doesn't become that military strong without thinking on his feet. He decided to send some money down the street to Harrod's Tavern. Anyone know where the old New Pentucket Bank is? At the corner? Where the pocket? That was Harrod's Tavern. There's a sign. Well, we'll get to that. There's a sign. There was a sign there. But. So at Harrod's Tavern, the money was sent to the tavern, and he invited everybody down to eat and drink on him. So they stopped taking his house for a little while, and then Saltonstall did depart Haverhill for Boston in 1774, never to return again. Some people say he went to Boston, and I've read where he went out to New Hampshire and left through Portsmouth Harbor. So, do we really know what way he went? I imagine he told somebody what way he was going and probably went another way, because that's what anybody would do. Because I have read in different books where they said he left to, he went up to where Governor Benny Wentworth lived, up Wentworth by the sea, up that way and out, which would be a shorter ride from here than going through Boston to leave for England, because you get right in Portsmouth and you're gone. So we're not really 100% sure, but both have been given, so I'm going to tell you. Being said that, he also, when he got back to Britain, he refused service in the British government, and he did not want to act against the colonists of this country, so he refused. Eventually, he would continue on in England. The Saltonstall left Haverhill permanently. Colonel Saltonstall never came back to America. He died in Kensington, England in 1785. In 1814, the prosperous merchant James Henry Duncan bought the property and built the new house, which is what we have today, for his son Samuel and his wife Mary. Dr. James Brickett. There's his house, and there's his gravestone. Dr. Brickett was a physician, a soldier, in the American Revolution, born February 16, 1738 in Newbury, Massachusetts. He married Edna Merrill in 1759 in West Newbury. In 1762, Dr. Brickett established his medical practice at Haverhill. Shortly after that, he began his military career as a surgeon's mate in the French-Indian War. On September 5, 1774, James Brickett became the first captain to lead the Haverhill Artillery Company. On April 19, 1775, Lieutenant James Brickett, Captain James Sawyer, and Ebenezer Colby, and Lieutenant Samuel Clemens' company of Minutemen We're told 105 officers and men left from Lexington, but never made it Lexington, as I said, ended up in Cambridge. Answered and then later, on June 7, 1775, Brickett led the 10th Massachusetts Volunteer Regiment at the Battle of Bunker Hill, during which he was wounded. 1776, Brickett was named Brigadier General, full command of the Massachusetts levies, leading the troops during the sea battles at Lake Champlain and at Beauregion's surrender at Saratoga, October 17, 1777. General Brickett was placed in command of the escort and marched prisoners, 6,000 back from the battlefield of the Hudson River to Cambridge, Massachusetts. Dr. Brickett lived in his home at 136 Water Street till 1760, from 1762 until his death in 1818. He's buried in protected burial ground, and urban renewal took his house down. The next one we're going to get to is a very interesting person. Molly Stark. Who's heard of Molly Stark? Anybody? Oh, a few people have. Okay. She was born Elizabeth Page here in Haverhill, Massachusetts, February 16, 1737. Daughter of Caleb and Elizabeth Merrill Page, so mother was a Merrill. Growing up, she had the nickname of Betsy, so first she was called Betsy instead of Elizabeth. Father was a successful merchant and militia captain. Mom died when she was 5 years old. She was adopted by Ruth Wallingford, her uncle's widow. After 10 years, she returned home to be with her father in Stockstown, New Hampshire. Anyone know where that is? Dunbarton, New Hampshire. In 1732, 32 at the age of 15. And believe it or not, the father owned slaves, which was very rare all the way up in Dunbarton, New Hampshire. She married John Stark August 20th, 1758. They had 11 children, including Caleb Stark. Molly Stark's legacy. So, what was her legacy? So John Stark at the Battle of Bennington, there's a banner up there, Bennington, Vermont. There are your enemies, the Redcoats and the Tories. They are ours. Or, this night Molly sleeps a widow. That was one of John's favorite outside of Live Free or Die. If you live up in New Hampshire, you might know that. Or if you drive in Massachusetts, you might see that on some license plates. She was also known for her success as a nurse with her husband's troops. Now remember, there's a picture of Molly there. That's in Wallingford, Vermont. But remember, we had the guys that took care of the troops, the women. She took care of her husband's troops. She went with them. So she was an ardent patriot. She also helped her husband's troops during the smallpox epidemic and opening their home as a hospital during the war. On November 1778, well, before that, she also tended to injured troops, even her husband and her husband's men that fought in the war. She was also a strong-minded woman, spoke her mind, and believed in the cause of freedom. In 1778, she petitioned the state of New Hampshire, praying for leave to inoculate herself and family from smallpox. The request was denied. And then early on in the war, when John Stark stole a cannon, he named it after his wife, the Molly Stark. And that cannon is located up in New Hampshire still today. She died June 29, 1814, 77 years old of typhoid fever. She was buried in Manchester. Everything I read on her, she was never sick as a kid, never sick through adulthood. She was a strong lady until she got typhoid fever. And she died 77 years old. On a quick, and so numerous monuments in the United States. This statue here is in Wilmington, Vermont. There's a Molly Stark School in Bennington, Vermont. A Molly Stark Mountain in the Green Mountain Range of Vermont. Molly Stark's home in Dunbarton. The Molly Stark Canyon in New Boston, New Hampshire, which we went up to see. Remember that, Joe?
Yeah.
And then the Molly, then that's it. And then she's buried in Manchester, New Hampshire, with her husband. There's the Molly Stark in Nimminchin Township, County of Ohio. There's the Molly Stark Hospital in, what TV was it? And then there was a Vermont, Ohio. And then there was a Molly Stark Lake in Minnesota. So Molly got around. The last thing we're going to discuss here is General George Washington's visit. Washington took office in 1789, a Virginian man. November 4th, 1789, he stopped in Haverhill. And it was a very popular president with the residents in Haverhill. Plus, of course, he had his friends, the Bartletts here, and all these people he fought in the war with, too, so came down to visit them. That mirror you see, this one right here, is in the front parlor room of the Duncan house. And he missed, now, today, they shut down traffic. If a president or big leader shows up in your community, they just shut the road. There was no bridges going over, so they had ferries. He missed the ferry. And so he went to visit his friend, Mr. Bartlett, who let him in his house. They chatted for a while, and he fixed his wig and petticoat in that mirror, according to the story. There's new glass on that. That's not original glass. We still have the mirror up in the house. That's not original glass. He also got named Washington Square after him, and Washington Street were named for him. And before I forget, it says in the collection catalog, a button from George Washington's jacket. But we're not sure. Well, we came from the Bartlett family. It did have his regiment on the button, but that's all we know. Did he actually wear that button? None of us will ever know. We also have a piece of Ben Franklin's quilt. We're not sure if it is his quilted on, but that's how it came into the collection, so you can look at that on the table too. And to end all of this, in Chase's history of Haverhill, when Washington visited, he called Haverhill the most pleasant place in America. That should make you feel good, huh? We live in a pleasant place. Well, I went to this thing in Exeter years ago because they don't celebrate 4th of July. They celebrate a little differently because the national capital in Exeter during the American Revolution was the national capital for a while. So they celebrated at the end, between July 4th and the end of June. So they only do one. And to believe it or not, George visited Exeter. You know what he called Exeter? Yes. And then I gave a tour here once to the Annapolis Historical Society years ago, Annapolis, Maryland. And guess what George said there too? Can you guess? Place in America. So wherever George went, it was pleasant. He even slept here. And there's the plaque there. And the bed, according to Yankee Magazine, is supposedly at the Dustin Garrison house. Now, I looked at the bed there. I've been involved with that organization. There's no paperwork on that, so how that came from the Herod Stabbing or whatever to the Garrison house and how that all came about, but that was put in the Yankee Magazine article back in the 60s. So I just throw that out there too. And it started in Philadelphia in 1777, and the first 4th of July celebration. And in Haverhill, we started celebrating it in 1804. Then it kind of died off a little bit. The War of 1812 kind of brought them back to celebration. And then in 1870, it became a national holiday. And that's how we got the 4th of July. I want to thank everybody for coming. Any questions? Did I bore anybody?
So it took it like almost 100 years for it to actually be like a holiday?
Yeah. I mean, what?
To be a national.
National holiday, yeah.
Celebrated.
It was celebrated all over. I've seen reports in like, I'll go back to Exeter because I talked about Exeter. I've seen reports in the Exeter Town History book. It was celebrated 1780s and into the 90s. So there were celebrations. It just was not a national holiday. And then finally in 1870, they made it a national holiday. Yes, sir.
That photo, the picture you had, James Brickett, I'm on the Hall of Fame committee, and he's a member of the Haverhill Hall of Fame, and we found out just recently that picture, that portrait is actually his son, Dr. John Brickett, who is from Newburyport. We have it identified in our plaque and everything as James Brickett, but it's actually his son.
Oh, at the Haverhill Hall of Fame one?
Yeah.
I don't know, where did we find that one?
Well, what do they call it? The Old Newbury Society or something has the original portrait of, and they posted it on Facebook that I happened to see 6 months or a year ago, and I found out that I read about his son and how I said, oops, we've got the wrong picture up there, because there's no pictures of James Brickett that I'm aware of.
Interesting. Well, thank you for that tidbit.
That's an embarrassment to
That was
us.
there. Some previous educators, I think it was Jen Turner who made this talk, that, again, when you try to find anything, that is the picture that comes up. But
Oh, yeah.
not surprised,
because
a lot
we
of
put it
people
there.
are not identified. Right, because what the consultant struggles, because the picture you have on the Hall of Fame is not the right.
That's his son, Gurdon, who's
Yeah.
governor of Connecticut.
Yeah.
That's another you're bringing out all like.
Well, I mean, in fairness, as a historian, most of my life, I didn't say this because most of you guys know me, the ones up. I went to Bradford College, graduated last class with a history degree. What I studied in was colonial settlement, pre-colonial settlement in New England to the end of the Civil War. And there's not a lot of pictures. Even the Robert Rogers picture, and I do a talk on him and the French Indian War, we're not 100% sure that's Major Robert Rogers either. I mean, it's a great picture. It's the one that's been circulated. You can find it almost anywhere, even in that bicentennial book of Bethune. But I mean, is it really Rogers? We're not sure. I mean, because there weren't a lot of cameras around back then. I mean, they were, I mean, today we carry our cameras.
They have to be painted. We're not, to be full transparency, we're not sure that that portrait of Moses Hazen is him.
Yeah.
The three sources said it was him, but again, three sources, that's how mistakes are made. So
Yeah.
we use it as a representation. So
Yeah.
if you're a descendant, don't take that as, you know,
So we looked at Moses Hazen as a potential member, but I think he didn't spend enough time in
He was born here and then left for Canada afterwards, so he wasn't here that long. And one last thing I did have to say about Molly. Molly's granddaughter is actually buried in Lawrence, Massachusetts.
On that subject, Tom, I'm curious. I've heard of Molly Stack, but I was never aware that she was born in Haverhill.
Yeah.
I'm going to check that one out.
She's actually,
How long she lived in Haverhill?
she's actually a Hannah Dustin descendant. Her and her husband, John Stock.
Okay.
Through the Page line, and Stock through another line, but Elizabeth Page was her name. And she wasn't in Haverhill long because Daddy left town. So she was born in 1737. Her mom died when she was 5. And she lived with Ruth Wallingford, her uncle's widow. And then 10 years after that, when she was 15, she moved to Stocktown, which is now Dunbarton. And she was gone after. She never came back.
Okay, but she lived here till she was 5, that's, we have to have a substantive hearing.
Well, actually, maybe 15. I have to find out, I hadn't had time. When I decided to add Molly, I didn't find out where Ruth Wallingford and her uncle live. I'm gonna do that next, and when I finish that up, I'll get back to you on that.
Probably Wallingford, Connecticut or something.
No, I don't think she'd go that far than all the way out. She stayed around here.
Yeah.
She might have stayed in Haverhill, but she might have went up to New Hampshire, right up on the Berwick line up there too. I will find that information out and get it to you, because
Thanks.
Molly Stock was one of those, let's add her in because she did do a lot as a whole. She was born in Haverhill, so I said, yeah, let's do it. And we did it, and she had an interesting life and helped expound on the camp nurses and the camp life, and it gave the campers a name, because most of those women, we'd never find their names, because they weren't as prolific a person as Molly Stock. So it helped give a little name to the camp people, and that's what we want to do, try to give names to everybody. Any other questions? No? Well, I want to thank you all for coming. Check the exhibit out. You can go check out the rifles and the muskets. It's literally right at the top as soon as you walk in the room. So thank you, everybody.